Right. Can everybody hear me?
Good evening. We would like to introduce the Chief Beis Din of Sydney, Australia. Chief Dayan, it's an honor that you are with us. We're going to be learning over the next 10 weeks. I'm just kidding. There's no
Right. Can we start?
Yes.
Right. So I just want to see if I got the message. So 40 minutes class and 10 minutes questions. All right. So for the Rav Zion Shlitter participants, it's a pleasure and an honor to be speaking to you today. I hear that you're embarking on a very special course of Chuppah v'Kiddushin. And Chuppah v'Kiddushin is much more than just to learn how to conduct a ceremony. We're talking about the future of the Jewish people. And therefore it was placed in a part of Shulchan Aruch called Even HaEzer. Even HaEzer is the part which was out of the four, as we all know, the four parts of Shulchan Aruch. There's Orach Chaim, which deals with our daily conduct, including davening, Shabbos, and Yom Tov. We have Yoreh De'ah, which deals with Isur v'Heter, laws of Kashrus, laws of Nida. We have Choshen Mishpat, which deals with monetary disputes and civil conduct. And then we have Even HaEzer, which deals with marriage, divorce, and everything in between, which includes permitted marriages, forbidden marriages, consequences, and so on and so forth. And throughout our history, we know that this was the part which was the most separate as far as who to allow to deal with it. And because when a Rav is asked a question on any part of halacha, there's a tremendous amount of responsibility that goes into answering the question. However, as much as a Rav has to think very carefully about every single question, when it comes to a question of Chas v'Sholom, God forbid, paskening wrongly in laws of kashrus, or even nida, a person can do tshuva, a person can repent, and when it comes to a monetary dispute, if a mistake is being made, money can be given back. When it comes to the questions of yuchsin, of relationships between people, Jewish or sometimes Jewish and non-Jewish, the consequences are such that which Shlomo HaMelech is quoted to say, "Me'uvas shliyochel biskain." Sometimes a wrong, a crookedness that can be straightened out. You can't fix it because sometimes the situation is such you've already created the damage, and damage will haunt the Jewish people for generations. And therefore, even when you go back into our history and you look at the Pinkas, like the notes, and the different reshimas which were made in such great organizations such as Vad Arba Rotzes, when they established in the Middle Ages a central body of halacha, you can see how Even HaEzer was always put aside, something which was always designated to a very, very Yechidus Gula. Now we live in a generation where it became a reality that young rabbis, pulpit rabbis, Chabad Shluchim, they are in a position to conduct weddings. And the question is, number one, what's the source for it, which we'll discuss today, and what are some of the underlying issues that even precede the actual what happens under the chuppah. What happens under the chuppah is also a lot of responsibility. When somebody just learns a digest, takes an RCA digest, even a Chabad digest, whatever digests are, and he learns how to conduct the wedding, it's a very good chance that he will not know that he's actually creating a situation where a couple is not married, according to halacha, and they could be living without a marriage, which is, again, it's a very, very tremendous spiritual damage that is created. So for that reason, at one point I was interviewed by a magazine called Campus about what I believe should be a protocol for any rabbi who is conducting a wedding, apart from studying the laws, what to do under the chuppah, which obviously is a must. But even before that, what are some of the principles of how do you know, what do you do when a couple comes to you to get married? And subsequently, afterwards, I made a more comprehensive takanon, which means a protocol which will come out hopefully next week in a sefer that I'm publishing, a book of Shalos and Tshuvos, and I want to sort of make a separate kuntras out of it and give it to all of the rabbis who are conducting weddings. It was endorsed by the chief rabbis of Israel, who believe it should be a protocol for any rabbi in any city around the world who is involved in Siddur Kiddushin. So with that introduction, I'm going to talk about the challenges and the possible issues that come up when one is asked to officiate. And ultimately, why is it a necessity, which American Jewry sometimes didn't see for many, because America has a culture of a decentralization. But if you go to places like Eretz Yisrael, Israel, when you go to places like England, South Africa, Sydney, Australia, it's a given that in order to marry a couple, the rabbi who's marrying them must send them to a Beis Din to be able to approve them. And we'll go through some of these the sources for that, and some of the possible issues that come up that could happen if this is not done. So first of all, there are two types of issues that are called psulei chitn, which means when there's a certain disqualification and a certain psul, certain damage, and a certain type of a situation which doesn't allow for wedding to go through. Sometimes it can go through in an absolute way, that was never, and sometimes it could be eventually fixed, something could be done to fix it, but right now it's impossible. And we'll divide those issues into two parts. One of them is Jewish status of the chosen and the kala. And I think everybody knows that in Jewish law, in order to get married, well, the chosen and the kala have to be Jewish. If they're going to marry on the chuppah, I mean, if you have both are non-Jewish, they also get married, but not obviously not under the chuppah. But in order for a Masada Kedushin to marry a couple, they both have to be Jewish. And the second one, which we'll discuss afterwards, is a question of problems and issues that arise when the chosen and the kala are Jewish, or we've established the fact that they're Jewish, and nevertheless, it still has to be checked by a Beis Din in order to be able to allow for the marriage to go through. Let's take our Rishon, Alachrim, Achrim. Let's talk about first the question of Jewish status. First of all, where does it come from? Why can't we take an attitude that a person comes to you and says, Ivri Onoichi, I'm a Jew? Why can't we just say, okay, every person's believed who he is, and let's marry them? Why do we have to check? As a matter of fact, we all know that when somebody has a synagogue, somebody has a shul, a Chabad house, and a person comes to you and says, look, I'd like to start attending your Chabad house, if you will say, please produce documents, please show me that you're Jewish, you may never see him again. So we'll discuss later on the question, when does the achrayas, when does the responsibility begin to be able to ascertain the person is Jewish? But we see a very interesting dichotomy, we see a paradox. On one hand today, it's a given in any reputable place. Again, unfortunately, in America, there was it was a situation where, because of lack of accountability to anybody, each one is doing their own thing, we have as a result a file in my cabinet of so many ksubas that we saw from American Orthodox, not conservative reform, that shouldn't have gone through. People shouldn't be married. But nevertheless, everything needs a mock. So the reality is, on one hand, today it's a given by all poskim that one cannot rely on a, like you say in Yiddish, afagut mevort. Just on somebody saying, yeah, I'm Jewish. You have to check every single couple. On the other hand, we see that if you go back to Chazal, and you go back to the ultimate primary sources, which is Talmud, we see a whole different story. We see that at least two places in Gemara, one of them in Gemara Psochim, Dav Gimel Omen Beis, and specifically the way Tosfos explains the Gemara, and the other place in two places in Yevomis, in Mem Hey Omid Aleph and Mem Zayin Omid Aleph, and also Tosfos talks about this Gemara, and from both places, from all the three places, it seems that when a person comes, even without any prior chazakah, he has no chazakah whatsoever that he's a yid, you believe it. I won't go into it right now to learn the Gemara inside because the time is very limited. One particular Gemara, a particular Moira wanted to set somebody up. Actually, it was a Tanach. A Tanach wanted to set somebody up, and he wanted him to be exposed. And therefore, he told him to ask for a part of the Koren, which is not. Everybody would know that it's not part of the matnas kahuna, part of the things that you give to be eaten. And right away was exposed. So from here we see that if he wouldn't have been exposed, nobody would ask him if he's Jewish or not. Another place, there was a boyra who told a particular person to go to a place where nobody knows him and not to say something about his yichus and to get married. So see over here that you don't ask a person who comes to get married. I'm talking about over here marriage, not just stam, accepting the person's a Jew in the regular interaction. Because marriage obviously is the most serious part of consequence of accepting somebody as a Jew or not. And this actually is a tzugang, this is the attitude, and this is the way of kimat all of the Rishonim, with a very few exceptions. In Yerushalmi, actually, in Gemara Rosh Hashanah, it seems differently. It talks about Eidim. It seems that the Yerushalmi took a different position, that you cannot accept a person without prior knowledge who he is. You can't accept that he's Jewish. But the vast majority, as we say, Rav Binyan, of all of the Rishonim, including the Rambam, and the Rashba, and the Ritva, which all the Rishonim took the position of Tosfos, that when somebody comes to get married, you believe him. And again, it's hard to understand what changed. The halacha has changed. So if you look in the many of the shuvas, first of all, we see that already when, despite the fact what's written officially in Rishonim, we see that the Metzias was different. I'm going to just quote two of the earlier Rishonim in Shulchan Aruch and Eben Ezer. I'm going to quote the Berheitev, because even though the Berheitev quotes by Shmuel there's only one source, but Berheitev quotes a number of sources. The Berheitev says, when he talks about this concept of checking somebody for the Yuksim, it says, the Tur Kosev B'Shem Harama. The two wrote the name of the Rama. Rama wasn't the Ramoy, was Rama, was one of the Rishonim. Misha Eidem Mishpachta Yidua. If the family is not known to us, and we're talking about Rishonim over here, Lo Yamrinan Shu B'Cheskas Kashrus. You don't say that he has a chazaka of being Jewish, of being kosher. V'chen yesh lahachmir Beishmul, and that's a quote from Beishmul. Continues the Berheitev. V'chen kosav Beis Hillel, not to be confused with the Beis Hillel, one of the Zugais. We're talking about Beis Hillel, one of the Achronim. Mi shebo me'eretz acheres, whoever comes from a different community that you don't know who he is, an isha, a man or a woman, a bocher or bisula, or a bocher or young lady, alman almona, a widow or widower, sorich raya shu Yisrael. He must bring a proof that he is a yid. Of avshim isnagim kedas Yisrael. Interesting over here. Over here, a lot of people say, listen, the guy is over here shows that he's a yid. He's acting, talking Yiddish. He's acting as a yid. So that's already good enough proof. Says over here, he quotes by Shmuel and by Hillel, even when they're behaving as yidden, kedas Yisrael, medabrim b'kil shoynenu, and is speaking our tongue. Yodim b'chol tuva Yehudim, and they can tell you how the Baba and how they did dikas chometz and how did kaparas, and they'll tell you how they conducted the seder. Afal became slichim raya. They have to bring evidence and proof. And he writes over here, he's already now Berheitev lived in the 1600s, and he writes this already for a long time. Was the takana in Medina Slita she'ein l'sader shum kiddushin, that you can't beside the kiddushin elaim ken sheyesh l'raya shu Yisrael, unless you have proof that you are a yid u'me'ezu mishpacha, and from which mishpacha you come. So we see over here, and similarly in Chuta Mishulash, which was Chaim Volozhiner, says a similar, and he was already lit a little bit later. He lived in the 18th century. He says a similar concept that you cannot rely on a person saying "Ich bin a Yid." You have to be able to choker v'dorish. This became like I said before, a given, something which is not even a question in today's organized communities. And it's discussed in many tshuvas, such as Midrash Moshe, Yabi Ulman, Mishnah Halachos, Shema Shlomo. Shema Shlomo talks about it. Very interesting. If anybody wants to see a very, very beautiful exposition to this subject, in Shema Shlomo Harav Amar Shlita, he talks about the Chelik Beis, Ebenezer, Simon Vov, and Piskei Din Rabbonim, and so on and so forth. What do they say? What changed from all the Rishonim who said something different based on the Bavli and the Tesis? So what they explain is that if you look at all the Rishonim, it's a milsa b'taimu. They give a reason why from this particular Mocker and Bavli, and from the Rishonim, why we believe that somebody is a Jew without prior chazakah. And the reason, they give three reasons, and all based on klolim which Chazal gave us. We know that Chazal have given us certain klolim which apply both to Isur v'Heter and also apply to Yonah Yuchsin. For example, there's a cloud of Roiv, majority, or sometimes Tzerubai, double majority, which I won't go into right now. But what the Rishonim are saying, that it's a very vast majority of people come along saying that I'm a Jew, they are Jewish. And you rely on the Roiv. Roiv is not something which is our invention. It's something which Chazal have enacted. We know we have sometimes Kol HaPorish Merubai, and sometimes you have Kavua Mechzel Mechza. So there's, there's certain clothing which we're given how you apply when somebody comes out from his community, he comes from a Roiv. And the majority of people come along claiming they're Jewish, they'll be Jewish. That's the first reason. Second reason to say, Milsa David la Glul Mishakri Insh. That's something which will be eventually discovered, people don't lie about. And the third thing is, which also is something which the Chazal have established. And the third thing is a question of chazakah. That somebody comes, and especially when that's where he talks about people who have certain type of a visible, like the Ber Hatev says, the physical behavior as a Jew. Because in those days, anybody comes and say I'm a Jew, he would behave as a Jew because nobody behaved as a Jew. There was no secular Jews in those times. So anybody who comes along and he wears tzitzis and he wears a yarmulke and he looks like a Yid, it's a chazakah that he's a Yid. Come along, the Achronim will tell us that all the three reasons don't apply today. And anybody who is in the field will know that it absolutely doesn't apply today. First of all, let's talk about the Roiv. The Roiv, we cannot say anymore, but the vast majority of people coming along and saying that they are Jewish, they're actually Jewish. And this is for two reasons. One of them, even if we don't get into the question of imun, of trustworthiness, because we say that, this person looks like he's telling the truth. Nevertheless, the mitzias today, unfortunately, is there's a huge amount of people who think that they're Jewish and are not Jewish. And this is a result of very unfortunate turn of our history. First of all, in America, Beroshim, but in many other places, there is a huge amount of not reliable and not acceptable conversions, starting with Reform and Conservative. And I've witnessed myself, I have people, shluchim and rabbis from different countries come to me to help them with shurim, with certification of Jews and couples. And recently I had somebody came to me who went to a destination waiting to get married. And he told me that his name is Yerachmiel Bereb Yankiv Tzvi Halevi. Sounds Jewish. I never heard of a person like Yerachmiel Bereb Yankiv Tzvi Halevi who is a goy, and he was a goy gomer because his mother converted conservative. And he never had a clue. To him, conservative was like a modern Orthodox. It was like where he came from, conservative were considered to be like much, much better than Reform. And he never thought of even a question by him that he wasn't Jewish. But he definitely wasn't Jewish. Al pi halacha. We have people who come from the Soviet Union who think that, it goes by the blood. So if three grandparents are Jewish and one of them is not, they go by the majority. Look, they're persecuted as Jews and they really think they're Jewish. There's so many different examples of people that believe they're Jewish. And if we'll have time, we'll give some examples. But that's the first reason. This reason has nothing to do with imun, with trust. Even if we trust them, they're not lying, we still have a huge amount of cases that people are not aware of, that come along saying that they're Jewish and they're not Jewish. The second reason is that today it became also a reason for people to want to be Jewish, which was a very interesting phenomenon which never existed before. In the past, people tried to run away from persecutions, and sometimes they would hide the fact that they were Jewish. But one thing is for sure, you never ever saw in the past there was a person who wasn't Jewish who tried to pretend that he was Jewish. It never happened. It was an unheard of situation. Today, it's a ma'asim b'chol yom, and there's so many different reasons why it happens. It happens because, first of all, today, being a Jew it's not anymore a situation where you have to be shunned away and be on a, you could be a Jewish person and still be very, in the secular society, you can have a career and everything else. I remember, I have in my files, with Russian Jews, the birth certificates, they have to mention in that nationality section that, Yevrei, a Jew, or Ruski, or Russian, or Ukrainian, or whatever it is. So in the past, I know for a fact there's certain people that were Jewish, and I know the Jewish 100%, I know who the mother was, the grandmother was, without any question whatsoever, and they managed to have, it wasn't easy, but they managed somehow to change, in those days, it was very hard, to change on the metrica, on the birth certificate, that they Ruski, Russian. Why? Because they wanted to have a career, they wanted to get into university. Later, so in those days, it was a reality that some people could have been listed as non-Jews, but if you dig hard enough, you prove that they're Jewish. Later on, in the late 80s, early 90s, there were thousands of forgeries of people forging documents for a few rubles. It was very simple to do, and something which we see every day. People learn, especially how to pick up the ziyufim, the forgeries, because it was a ticket out of Russia, either to go to Israel or to go to Germany, to be helped to get certain zchuyot, even living in Russia itself. We face it with people who forged the fact they were Jewish because the kids were allowed, free education, certain types of presents for Hashanah, for Pesach, and everything else. So to say that there's a roy of people coming along and saying that they are Jewish, that they are really Jewish, it's not valid anymore. It's also not true to say that Milsa David Laglui, the people are really hoping today that there are different sophisticated ways how to find out. That's number two. And also all the chazokas today, I'm going to talk about soon, the three klolim of Moshe Feinstein, who told many of his Talmidim how to be able to, when they do Birur Yadus, when I do certain investigations, where somebody's a Jewish, he said there should be 3 sniffim, and you never rely on one of them. Minimum 2 of them, sometimes even more. So he said that one of them is documents, and documents are different in every place. You can't compare America to South Africa to Russia, Russia to Hungary. Every place you have to have different knowledge of which documents to use and which documents are valid. One thing everybody knows, for example, in this field, that you can never use a get as an ultimate proof of Jewishness. Somebody comes along and says, listen, we're divorced in a basement. Even if it's a basement of a Moshe Feinstein, it cannot be used as an ultimate. It's a very, very good sniff sometimes. You could add to it, and you can have a pretty good, a better idea that most likely the person is Jewish. But on its own, you can't use it. Why? And the Moshe himself will tell you right away never to use it, because when it came to divorces, in order to avoid the terrible repercussions of an Ashes ish or married woman maybe being with somebody else, they always did gittin, even if there was a suffix in the Jewishness of the Baal of the Ish. They always conduct a get, and therefore get cannot be used on its own. So Moshe says that you have to know which documents to use, but documents is one particular sniff. Another sniff is Shemas Muvhakim. There's certain names that are predominantly Jewish, also in different countries, the different years. And the third one, which is the most difficult, the most dangerous to use nowadays, is what it talks about over here, the knowledge and the recounting of Jewish observance. Today, with internet and Google, people come to Bezdin, they've done the research, and they can tell you such interesting things. So you have to be very, very careful with the third one. But Ramosha anyway said you can maximum use 2 out of 3, but you can never use one on its own. So this is the reality. The reality is that today it's a given in every single rabbinate, organized rabbinate in the world. When I say rabbinate, I mean organized rabbinate, because in the places where it's free for all, again, it's at the discretion of any individual rabbi. That when a couple comes along, they have to be sent to a reliable place, either a bezdin or a bakoyach of bezdin. Different countries have different systems. In Israel, for example, they have a very interesting system where they have a double buffer zone. In the beginning, when you go to get married, there is a Roshem Yisuin. It's a knowledgeable person who does the preliminary check. If he sees any red lights or any red flags, he can't make a decision on his own. He can't decide on himself. He must send it to the bezdin, and the bezdin will open up a tick, and so on and so forth. And the bezdin will not be swayed by the fact that the wedding is happening tomorrow, and you have to cancel the whole wedding. If there is a question mark, it will go to them. But in some places, the bezdin himself does all the chakiras, and some places the bezdin establishes another body that does the preliminary check for them, and then if any questions, they bring it to the bezdin. But whatever the case is today, it's taken for granted that this must be done. Then we have another part to this investigation, to this what's called Shiur certification of the status. And this has to be done and this always had to be done. That's not a new thing. That's something we'll see in a minute. It was done already in Chazal, in Gemara. It's already taken for granted that it must be done. That even if you know for sure that the choson is a yid and the white and the kala is a yid in it, and each one was already checked in the bezdin, each one was already has a letter saying that they're Jewish. It cannot be left to a Nesada Kedushin to make a decision to marry them. It has to go through a bezdin. And I'm going to give you a little bit of it. It's worthwhile to go through the mocker for that and how it relates to present times. So the Gemara in Kiddushin, and it's not only in Kiddushin, but I will quote because that's the most logical place to quote from. The Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Vov Amud Aleph says, the Omar Rav Yehuda Omar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda said name of Rav Shmuel, in the name of Shmuel, Kol she'ein yodeh b'tiv gittin v'kedushin, yeh lo esek kemoy. Anybody who is not proficient in the laws of Gittin and Kiddushin, lumps them together, shouldn't have anything to do with it. Comes along Rashi, and Rashi says, what does it mean, you shouldn't have anything to do with it? And Rashi says, Liyo is dayan bedover, to rule, to paskin, in anything to do with it. Shema yatir isur erva, because you may allow a forbidden marriage. Vezeu ivu she'en yochel lisaken, and this is a wrong, a damage that you can never ever misaken, you can never ever fix. So comes along the Shulchan Aruch. I'm not going to read the tour. I read the Shulchan Aruch, and the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Mem Tes Se'iv Gimel in Ebenezer quotes the Gemara and says, "Kol mishein boki b'tiv git v'kedushin la'esek emoyen." Nothing to do with it. Lahoira is bohem, to paskin anything to do with it. Shebekal yochel litos v'yatir es ha'erva. It's very easy to matter a forbidden marriage. The goyim laharbois mamzeirim b'Yisrael, and you'll cause the Jewish people to have illegitimate children, which includes literally mamzeirim, and sometimes other similar situations like chalolim, a cholol, which we'll see later on, also is something that doesn't leave the Jewish people. It's passed on from father to son to grandson ad sof kol hadayros. That's what the Mechaber says. Now, in this Mechaber, we have a machlokes achronim. What does it mean? Does that mean that even the person who marries the couple has to be a dayan and a posek, or only to give a heter to marry? So here we see, I'm going to quote the Bishmuel, because Bishmuel also quotes the Taz. So I'm going to kill two birds with one stone. I'm going to quote the one which brings both opinions. So Bishmuel says, Lahoyres bohem to paskin, betaz sifkoten aleph, in Taz, such a paragraph, medayek dafka lahoyres isur. Medayek dafka lahoyres osur. Dafka to paskin is forbidden unless a person is a posek and a dayan. But to be Sader Kiddushin, you're allowed to, even if you're not a person. The ancient Lahiris, because you're not really pasking. Aval Sader, and then he goes explains what with the get. Now, on this particular Bishmul and Taz, it's a whole polemic. I'm not going to give you the whole, of the shittas, but I'll give you some of them. They are divided into those that rule like the Bishmul and the Taz, to say that it's only the sort of certifying and allowing the Hassan to go through, that must be done by a Bezdin. But Siddur Kiddushin can be done by anybody. Obviously, they not saying by anybody. It has to be people like yourselves who are studying and learning how to do it, because that's everybody. When you don't know, if somebody doesn't know even what to do under the chuppah, that itself will not be allowed. That goes without saying. But they're talking about a person who knows how to inside the Kiddushin, but he is not proficient in Gittin and Eben Ezer and so on and so forth. So you have great poskim such as Dibur Malkiel, such as the Maram of the Marsham of Brizhan, the Brizhanarov wrote very, very fundamental tshuvas. They coming along and saying, no, even if you are not, even if you just Masada Kiddushin could be a terrible, terrible michshelim, and so on and so forth. I would say, as a bottom line, because we have to get to the bottom line over here, we have to move from, we can only cover topics to give you a general idea. I would say that today it became a given that in a situation of a shul, of a kehillah, it's not only allowed, but it's also very much encouraged that the rabbi of the family of the kehillah should inside the Kiddushin. There's nothing which brings the family close to the rabbi as when he's involved in the life cycle events and he performs the ceremonies. And therefore, in order to do it, everybody should actually go through the halachas of Siddur Kiddushin. When it comes to allowing the couple to get married, to be approved, that the halacha is undisputed, as we say, leis man de palik. There's no other opinions that it must. And when some shliach tells him, but if I'll tell him to go to Bezdin, first, and I'll tell you how that if you know how to do it, it always works. But if the shliach who is very much afraid to lose the couple, he says, if I'll tell him to go to Bezdin, they may go to Reform, then they go somewhere else. I tell him over here, there's not much choice. Over here, we're talking about a situation which is it's a halacha which is undisputed, and it has to happen. That you have to send people to be approved, and if the couple is obstinate, but just like every establishment has its rules, we have to be also strong about the rules we have. I mean, civil marriages, they also have the rules, and a civil celebrant will also say, I will not conduct a civil wedding unless I have such and such, certain types of documents, certain things. So if a civil celebrant can respect his position as a celebrant and not conduct a wedding if the couple refuses to cooperate with him, halachas kavakam, we are ambassadors of Torah and halacha, that we have to be able to say that that's the way it should be done. This particular rule applies to a situation without any exceptions. Now, even if, for example, somebody's conducting, and that's something which I want to bring home to all the prospective rabbis and leaders and inside the condition, that even if you're conducting a wedding for a rabbinic family, two rabbinic family, you know who is the family of the Chosn, from the Kala, they know the Frum, they everybody knows who they are. We have to be able to still go through that system, which is done again. I once gave a shiur a couple of years ago to a group of rabbonim, and one of them said that he got married in England. He's a big miyuches. His family goes all the way to the Alter Rebbe. His wife was also a miyucheses. And he said that he was married in London. There was no monkey business. Everybody is doing the same thing. You get married, you have to go through, bring documents, you have to sign a form, and there's no exceptions. As a matter of fact, when I marry off my own kids, Ulman mechutonim, no matter who they are, they know they have to go through it. Nobody gets upset. If you have to fill out a form, you have to give us your certain documents, or we have to register you. We can make exceptions. And I'm going to give you now 3 reasons why exceptions cannot happen. Reason number 1, because of loy plug. The only time that people justifiably get upset and they feel targeted and distrusted and interrogated is when not everybody does it. Some people do it and they feel, I know that this guy did it, the rabbi didn't check him, and me is trying to check. So right away people feel slighted and upset. If it's a system, nobody gets upset. If everybody does it, that's a fact. Nobody gets upset. That's the first reason. The second reason is because you'll be surprised what you will find once you. Is everybody? I see. Oh, I thought it was frozen for me. You will be surprised to see what you discover. Sometimes you have no doubts whatsoever. And once you do a simple check, you found out that there's a major problem. And I want to tell you something that people don't know about, because every case is so private, it's so discreet, so confidential, that every single year we have cases where we take from Hassan and from Kalos to the mikveh, because when their parents became Baal Tshuva, nobody checked them out. There was a huge influx of Baal Tshuva that came to Lubavitch that have inspired so many people. And the Haredi Rabbonim never thought that there's a need to ask anybody, because they came from a culture that everybody, Lubavitch started with a handful of families that everybody knew who they were. And that was the culture. The people come along and say, you just marry them and that's it. And we have not 1 or 2, but so many cases. Each case is so different and unique. We found out why there's either Hassan or the Kala are not Jewish at all, without any doubt, or sometimes there is a major suffix, and you can't marry somebody in a suffix. There could be a problem with Giurim, there could be a problem with conversions, there could be problems with so that's the reason why and a second reason why it has to be done, because if there were more time, I would share with you very, very fascinating stories, but obviously without any hint to who they are. But nevertheless, the stories themselves show how beneficial it is to be able, once you have a system, it gives you opportunity to be able to help people. And in most cases, they're so grateful. You have no idea how grateful they are, because nobody wants to live. A person who has a real belonging to Yiddishkeit, he doesn't want to live for a minute with any kind of a suffix, let alone when he finds out there's much more than
Chris, here in America, what the rabbis do is that there is a form that the Hassan and Kala fills out. And if they were to answer that my mother converted or we were married prior, normally then a rabbi would go over to a proper rav or to a beis din. But if these forms were made with a lot of foresight. But if it appears that, there's no conversions, the mother was not converted, the bubble was not converted, no one ever got married and divorced, I don't think common practice now is for a rav to go over to a beis din and to give them the documentations.
So first of all, you're 100% right that in America it's not common practice. It is common practice in every other place that has a organized community. I mentioned before South Africa. No way a rabbi can conduct a wedding without a beis din approving. London, Sydney, Australia, Eretz Yisrael. And in the Alter Heim, as we say, the reason why it was always not a problem, because there was always the Mordechay who would inside the Kiddushin. It wasn't such a thing as pulpit rabbis. And Mordechay was a mumche in Ebenezer. I'm going to give you an example, a case in point. First of all, I want to tell you that Baruch Hashem, things are changing. I've spoken for the last 10 years. I'm speaking about it in every possible opportunity. Like I spoke to hundreds of shluchim about it. Today, I can tell you that we created a system where hundreds and hundreds of shluchim, not just dozens, but hundreds of shluchim that they now going through a beis din in order to be able to certify every marriage which they're doing.
To make it clear, the Hassan and Kala don't go to anyone. It's that the documents that they fill out is given over to a beis din.
No. We have actually a Zoom meeting with them. We have a system where we have a Zoom meeting with them. It's a system which we perfecting, and it works very, very well. Where they send, I can tell you how we work, for example. I mean, they can go to any bezdin that specializes in that area. But the way I work, and I work with hundreds of shluchim, that they download the paperwork on our website. They send it to my secretary. She organizes very quickly a Zoom meeting, and usually after the Zoom meeting, I'm able to, if there's no problems, I'm able to certify them. Sometimes I tell them we need more documents. Sometimes there are problems. I'm going to share with you a couple of such such stories if we have time today. We still got a bit of time. But what I want to say is to give a couple of examples. Example number one, I was asked when shluchim come to me, or rabbis come to me, and they say, look, I'd like you to certify a kala. The chosen ken ich sehr gut. I know him, such a beautiful family. I tell him, listen, I don't make exceptions. I will only do that for the chosen kala. I can't do one or the other. And the reason is for all the reason I've given you. But the last reason is the third one, which I haven't yet mentioned, is the reason that even if we know for 100% the chosen is a yid, the kala is a yidna, there still could be a yuchsin problem. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One example is that I was asked by a certain shliach to write a letter for Eretz Yisrael for a kala. Why only for a kala? Because in this case, the bezdin which was approving the wedding was in Eretz Yisrael. The chosen is Israeli. The chosen already sent all these papers and everything to them. So all they needed is to certify the kala is kosher, what's the status, if she's muteres lekoyen, if she's whatever it is, and they know that a knowledgeable bezdin will know what to write, which details to write, not just that she's Jewish, but to write exactly in the way that should assist them. And they asking for somebody that is on the list, because they also have lists of people who can write such letters. And therefore he turned to me, just I want to make sure you understand that that's the reason why in this case I made an exception, and just for the color. Not because I would usually do it, because the actual Kiddushin was already looked after by the bezdin in Eretz Yisrael. So I looked at the Kala's documents, and I found that the rabbi who married her parents was a very, very Erl Charov. He was one of those RCA, Yerushalayim, Yedei Sefer. He was a person that was very, very thorough. And he had a whole tick that he saved that I was able to find, to get access to, of what he went through to actually certify the parents of the Kala. And I could see that he had the Ribu documents to make sure that the Kala is Jewish. He had the Ribu documents to make sure that the Chosen is Jewish. He made sure that the Kala was a Pluya because she was Almona, and he wasn't satisfied to hear that she was Almona. He wanted to get a death certificate of a first husband. And when he put everything together, it was part of an impressive file, he was beside the Kiddushin for them. The only thing is that he didn't notice, and he didn't notice, the reason why he didn't notice it wasn't because he didn't know the halacha. The halacha, every child who learns Chumash knows the halacha. But you have to have a certain type of a mindset and certain type of a behavenkeit to be able to pick up right away those cases. That's why when it comes to Bir Yadus, it could take a long time. When it comes to Bir Yuchsin, it takes more knowledge. But the person who knows, he'll pick up those things very quickly. What he didn't realize was that this lady had a shwager, and the husband didn't have any kids, and she needed a chalitza.
What? Chalitza.
And to allow a woman, I'm not going to go into right now again, to allow a woman to marry without a chalitza is mamash b'chila daris. Could have been fixed. It didn't have to happen. But the results are extremely traumatic. That's case number one. When we're talking about chalitza, I want to tell you another case where even some people who deal with it, they wouldn't notice. We had a case here in Sydney. There was a young man, actually from my community. It was 2004. He came together with his family, his brother, and I looked after them. We made a bris milah for them. We made bar mitzvah for them. And now he's already the adults and everything else. He comes with a playlist with a lady. He fell in love with her. She wants to convert. And we have a system, like every business system, where they have to apply. They after a certain amount of time, they're given a teacher. They have to learn syllabus. They have to start taking on Jewish practice and live a religious, observant life. And at a certain point, they had to move to London because of his work, very successful career. And in London, they had 2 children, boy and a girl, and they continued to grow in Yiddishkeit and everything else. And then he was diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor, unfortunately. And London refused to operate. So he contacted Australian doctors and they sent him all these papers and they agreed to operate, and they said it's going to prolong. They didn't promise him anything, but they said it's going to prolong his life somewhat. He came to Australia. They were always practicing, but obviously they put everything on hold. So they put all of the studying and everything else that they put. They were already keeping Shabbos, keeping kosher. And he had the operation. It prolonged his life somewhat, but then things started to go bad again. And in one conversation, he said to me, he said, he never felt any entitlement or any kind of a pressure on the Bezdin. But he said, his dream would be, before he passes away, he would be it would be a big nechama for him to be married to a Jewish family, that he did something like that. He wasn't, So I spoke to my chaverim. I said, listen, they're keeping everything. It's true that according to the ideal protocol, usually we'd wait a bit longer until they finish the syllabus, everything else. But we can make a condition with her, not a condition as far as Gators of 9, not a condition in the Gators, but we can make just an agreement with her to continue to study afterwards and everything else. But in the meantime, they're already keeping enough it should be a kosher Gators. They keep Shabbos, kashrus, she'll go to mikveh, and so on and so forth. So we agreed to Megayer then. After Yom Tov, this is going back probably some, 8 years ago, something like that, 7 years ago, he took to the words, the condition became worse. We Megayer her, we Megayer the girl. The boy, unfortunately, we couldn't Megayer right away because there's a certain phenomena that when in this century, when secular doctors do a circumcision, once upon a time they did such a job that all you need to do is just touch with a needle. Tofas Nambris. Today, the line portion of circumcisions, it's the phenomenon of the last 2 decades. They have what's called tzitzin amakrim. They don't cut enough foreskin, and therefore it's not anymore possible just to give a touch of a needle. You actually have to redo the circumcision. Something which we learned by bitter experience. Now we check every single potential convert in the beginning of the. So with them, we checked them out. We couldn't convert him, so we converted just the mother and the girl. We scheduled the boy for a circumcision with Neshleisha. And we immediately, when we converted the mother, we conducted a chuppah in a hospital. He already couldn't stand, he was sitting down. We married them, and then he went to hospice. And just over a month later, he passed away. And as soon as he passed away, I had to go to Venezuela to do some fertility work that I'm doing with clinics and everything else. And as I was just sitting on a plane and thinking about the whole situation, it suddenly occurred to me that she is a chalitza. Because even though they have kids, but the kids are not their kids of Peloch, it's not his kids of Peloch. Peloch, he passed away without kids. Because they were conceived and born, especially even conceived would be also not enough. She wasn't Jewish. So all of these things, and I'm going to, next time I'll read you a list of how many things could happen if, Rabbi Zion's mentioned a couple of them. He mentioned the Shiloh, of a kahuna, but there's so many different things that could be a problem. And ultimately, if Rabboni would send them to Bezdin, they could sleep. First of all, you take away all of the responsibility from yourself. If there's a problem, the time is to the Bezdin, not to the rabbi. So if, for example, the rabbi says, look, I've got a problem, I can't marry you for whatever reason. If they know in advance that the rabbi is accountable to a higher body, and therefore, if you can't marry them, it's for that reason. It just makes life easier for everybody, but ultimately it saves a lot of big shame. So this is a particular example of how things could go wrong, even if. I'll give you just one more example, and then we'll have questions. There is in German a Lubavitcher rabbi in Manhattan that sends me all of his couples for Shiur. Now, that particular couple that he sent me, he says he's got a double bakosha. One bakosha is that I should be able to certify them, and also certify him as to be able to Masada Kiddushin in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, there's a rule like this. If any rabbi has a couple who lives in Los Angeles or in Florida or in New York, and the couple decides that it's nice to get married in Israel. They have nothing to do with Israel, the American citizens. The rabbi can take them to Israel, and he can conduct a wedding on the hills of Judah or in Golan or wherever he wants to, and he doesn't have to tell anybody about it. But if either the chos and the kala are Israeli citizens, then it's a criminal offense to marry them without going through Rabbanut, without registering Rabbanut. It's a criminal offense, yeah. You technically could sit in jail, even though the Poil, I don't think we'll put anybody in jail, but technically you could go to jail for that. And because in Israel, there's not such a thing as a civil marriage. So in America, if you conduct a chuppah, as long as even when they're married civilly, in most states, it's not a problem to do that. But because it's two separate things, just like de facto relationship is not against American law. Similarly, a chuppah doesn't do with American civil marriage. But in Israel, it's all together, and therefore you can't do it. So he asked me, because the kala was Israeli, so he asked me to approve. I've given this rabbi a course in Tzedek Kiddushin, so I was comfortable that he could do it. I had an agreement with him that when it comes to Yuchsin, I do it, and when it comes to Ksubas, I do Ksubas. Why the Ksubas? Because a lot of the halachas to do with the Ksuba depend on the results of the certification. For example, if you found out that the kala is Jewish but the father is a goy, how do you write the Ksuba? What if you found out that the chosin was conceived while his mother was not Jewish and he was born when she was Jewish? What if the chosin is a cholol? All these things, the halachas had to write a Ksuba. So I had an agreement with him. Ksubas I write for him. I make a beautiful Ksuba, I send it to him on a PDF, he prints it out, and it could be fancy Ksuba and everything else. But and the Yuchsin, I do for him, but the Tzedek Kiddushin, I went through a course with him, I was comfortable he could do it. So I called my friend in Israel, one of the Roshmei Nisuim, and he accepts it on one phone call or WhatsApp. Right away says, if you tell me it's good, no problem. So he right away registered the guy that he can conduct the wedding. And I conducted Tzedek Kiddushin, I conducted the Chakiros, to look into it, to the interview and the documents, everything else. Now, in a document which I got from the Chosin, I saw that his mother, who had a conservative ksuba, but the ksuba was written, you can have sometimes conservative rabbis who know what they're doing. You can see the way they write. You can see that they learned in, some way, they learned something. They know how to do it. It was a good handwriting. It was written according to halacha, the ksuba. And he writes in the ksuba, matrachta, she's a divorcee. And in the form, the chosin will have a question: were you born from your parents' first zivug, first marriage? And he writes, yes. I thought there's a discrepancy. I didn't want to ask him the question because I thought maybe that's something he doesn't know. So I said, I'd like to meet with your mother it was before Zoom, it was on Skype. Mother agreed, and I met with her and I said to her, it says over here that you were married before, and on the form it says that you were never married. So she says, look, I really was married before. I was married Orthodox. I was married for just a year. It was a very short marriage. I didn't even tell my kids about it. So inconsequential in my life. Now I met afterwards the father of the children. I'm married, thank God. I said, did you get a get? She says, yes, I got a get. Do you have? No, I don't have the paper. So we have an Orthodox, by her admission, there's an Orthodox wedding. So I interviewed her, and she gave me on the spot. She had no pre-planned answers. She described to me exactly where she got divorced. She got divorced in Baltimore. She remembers the street. It was in the late 70s. She told me the street where she was divorced in the address. She described to me how she went down the basement, how the rabbi looked. Gave me a lot of pratim. I called up Rabbi Benyovich, who was Av Bezdin in Baltimore. He told me that she for sure got divorced. There's no question about it, because she described exactly who were the two Misada Git in Baltimore at the time, and he was one of them. Told exactly his name, and she said she couldn't have made it up. It's impossible. She came to the right address. That's how he looked. He was in the basement. He was the son on Harav Ben-Gis, who was the Rav of the Veda Charetis. He was the Masada Gittin in Baltimore. He says also that the conservative rabbi who married her later, he had a rule. Despite the fact he was conservative, he would never ever marry anybody unless he would see an Orthodox get from one of those two rabbis who Masada Gittin. So I put all the information together. There's no question in my mind that she was divorced. Certainly, there's no way that you could even have a chashash of mamzerus over here. And I wrote a letter for Rabbanut saying that check the chos and the kala, and they both are 100% kosher, and there's a certain nusach you write and everything else. Now, when they see a letter from me that everything is good, they don't check anymore. That's enough for them. They let the guy to Masada Kiddush. If this particular rabbi would have gone to them and they would have done their own birur, what would happen is very simple, without any question. The Roshem Yisu'im would right away see there's a problem, what I've seen, but he wouldn't be able to solve it himself. He would send it to Bezdin, and the Bezdin would start a tick. Now, the couple comes to Israel half a week before they marry. There's no question they would cancel the wedding, and then there's no question that they would put everything on hold until the Bezdin will be able to verify everything. And that's what, one of the things that we go through in order to be able to see how important it is to do things in a way that is lechatchila done properly. There's a lot more to say, but I will go to questions now.
Are there any authors in here that you are familiar with in Los Angeles that do a birur both Yahadus and a birur Yuchsin?
So, look, there are. RCC does it.
For wedding, to marry people.
Yeah. When it comes to certain denominations, whatever, they are experts in certain areas more than other areas. So something which if it comes to the poil, I can explain. I don't want to talk about it here, but it's when it comes to certain types of denominations, they were more proficient than others.
So let me word it differently. There would be a ta'emus for the Truma community, the Babich community, to create a Beis Din just for Birur Yahadus and Birur Yuchsin. Is that a correct statement?
We're doing it right now. We are creating it as we speak. We are creating it. It's already working. It's already happening because we're helping. I'm now training some of my Talmudim Dayanos to do it. And we're now creating. We're helping. It's not a guzbah to say we're helping hundreds of Rabbonim and Shluchim to do it, rabbis and Shluchim to do it. It's already happening, but obviously we're going to make it more people involved in it. So we're going to create a very because it's going to grow more. At the moment, it's doable. It's we're coping with it, but it's going to grow obviously, and we're going to make it bigger.
I have two questions. What is the source for a woman who's pregnant with a boy who's pregnant, and then there has to be a change in the ksuba? You're saying that what's the source for that? That there has to be a different ksuba written for a woman who is pregnant while she's a goy, but then she becomes a ger, she's a gayers?
You're talking about the woman who she's not Jewish herself?
Right. No, he means to say that what nusach in the ksuba will indicate that the conception was shaloi b'kedusha.
Right. So when it comes to a father who is not Jewish, if the chosn or the kala are Jewish, but the mother is Jewish, but the father is not Jewish, then virtually everybody agrees. In Gittin, it's 99% of Masada Gittin write the mother's name. That only two Gittin that I know in the world. One in Eretz Yisrael is an exception. So just write the name without the mother's name. And there's one other Bezna in the world that I know that does the same. But otherwise, everybody, Moshe Feinstein, of Henkin, everybody used to write the mother's name. When it comes to a woman who is, let's say a woman. Let's start with the woman. For men also, the same shayla applies. Let's say that the mother was pregnant with them when she wasn't Jewish, and the mother went to the mikveh, the mother converted. The child was born Jewish. We call such a phenomena haidosa lo b'kedusha. The conception was not kosher, but the birth was kosher. In such a case, there is a difference of opinion what you write. and I wrote a tshuva about it in a gilum called Oitzer HaPoskim. There was one opinion that says that you write the Bas Avraham Avinu. And I humbly disagreed. I felt that even though that there are certain similarities and certain halachas that apply to a geiros that would apply to such a girl, for example, she can't marry a kohen. But I felt that there are still certain differences between a regular geiros or regular ger and a person who's born b'kedusha, and therefore I advocated and I brought rayas for it to write just the name. And anybody, a ksuba is a shtar yuchsin. And that's why in ksuba it's important to be able to at least bring the attention of somebody else that there's an issue. Later on they can call up and they can ask. And this already would be enough to be able to bring to the attention of somebody who's looking through the ksuba, to be able to call the bezdin and ask the question. Again, I'm not giving all the reasons, but that's in my opinion is the best way to do it. Right, just the name itself.
I have a question. Hi. Whose responsibility is it to do all that background? So for example, when the Rebbe would be Masada Kedushin, the Rebbe would call people up, like whose job is it to do that?
When the Rebbe was Masada Kedushin, that was for a ruchnistic reason. And when the Rebbe was Masada Kedushin only for the families that were all very well known. There was the Rosenfelds and the Chipschriks and it was only a handful of families. Don't forget the Rebbe last Chuppah Kedushin the Rebbe did was in Tovshin Chod Gimel, 1963, after big break. Most of them were done in the 1950s. Every single family was known, and the Rabbonim of Crown Heights were responsible. The Rebbe didn't write his own ksuba, the Rebbe relied on them, and the Rebbe was Masada Kedushin in a ruchnistic sense that he was the one actually that said the brachas under the chuppah. But the responsibility.
Should he have a bitter yahadus and yuchsin done now, post marriage? That's what really is asked, I think.
But what in the present society we live in, the responsibility should be on the Masada Kedushin to send it to a body that either is the bezdin or the bakoach of the bezdin or the staff or appointed by the bezdin to be able to approve and to certify everything. That's how we put it today. That should be the
Thank you.
Any other question?
Do we do this retroactively or no?
Okay, so you have a second. Should it be done? Is there any advantage of doing this retroactively?
Sorry, I didn't hear. Advantage of what?
Someone has a brother-in-law that they don't like. In other words, is there a responsibility on someone somewhere to do this, even if the couple is married? Or kivin shenitma, once they're married, let them be.
Okay. So first of all, you never say kivin shenitma by Yidden. You only say by mamzeres, and even there, it doesn't mean that you're milim ayin. I think that at a certain point, everybody should do it. I mean, everybody should be comfortable. You know, when your kids get married, you should ask the bezdin to check, and automatically the bezdin will check the parents. So whatever the situation is, it should be done in a certain situation that is suitable. I mean, obviously, if we're talking about a family that's known beyond any doubt, there's nothing with them, then today again, if I would Masada Kedushin for the most miyuchasdik family, I would make them do exactly the same. I do it for myself. I take my, all of my mechutonim, I make them give the ksuba. I take my own ksuba. I give my own documents, everything else, my wife's documents, and I certify it. So I believe we should be done across board for everybody's getting married. So marriage is an opportunity. It's very hard to come to people and say, listen, you all come and get tested. It's not realistic. But marriage is one particular opportunity to do it. I recommend really, and I have, it's really not so much a place for this forum because over here we concentrate on civic Kedushin, but I have also protocols which other opportunities should be used to do that. For example, life cycle events, and what's the advantage of it? The reality is if it's done properly and if it's done with a certain type of If it's done in a way that will not frighten people, you can do it in a very pleasant way, and you can explain to people this in a way that is understandable. But ultimately, people appreciate the fact that when they were already certified at bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah and all of this, all these sort of life cycle events, then it makes marriage without any stress. When they come to get married, they just fill out the form. They can say, okay, all of my documents are already in the Besdin. Everything is there. And all the Besdins to just look at the form, see if there's any yuchsin issues, and in 5 minutes they'll be able to certify them. So there is advantage to do it earlier. And also because many times, especially in America, rabbis rely on life cycle events to prove Jewishness. I know myself a case when a certain rabbi in America who conducted a wedding with a girl, a Hassan, and he accepted the girl as being Jewish because the parents showed a photo of a bris of a brother who was gemaled by Elyahu with a beard and everything else. And he said, look, the brother is Jewish, the sister must also be Jewish. And they weren't Jewish because the male didn't bother to check.
All right, one second. How would I get access or to get to learn under about the Masada condition? You were saying you have a course, if possible.
Sorry, it was a question to me.
Yeah.
Can you repeat it?
So how do I get access to try to get to learn the Masada condition course that you offer?
I told you that's what you're doing here, isn't it? That's what you do. This is a course.
I was saying because I asked for Zion. It's impossible because as I wouldn't get married. I wouldn't marry anybody off because I haven't done any course or anything like that on it, and that's what I want to know. If this course does it, or can I go to you and get something else?
No, go to this course. I don't want to.
No, I'm still do it here, no problem. Not even a question. I was clear from you. Are you going to give or something after?
I'm involved with this course also.
Let me just clarify something. That there's a diverse group over here, but the Rabbi Yemini, if you would like to get a certificate, so then maybe there'll be additional simanim and shulchan aruch that you'll have to learn. Then we'll arrange with Rabbi Yemini. Perfect.
Is this Rabbi Asher Yemini? I can't see.
No, I'm the youngest brother, younger brother.
Because your brother Osher comes to me for all of these things. He's one of the people.
He told me. I told him that I'm doing this. He says, "Oh, that's what I go to." He told me.
All right, Chavre, let's call it tonight. A big thank you to Rabbi Ulman. We are going to be continued. Ayasher Koyach. Thank you. Guys, I don't know how this works.